It's about standing up for yourself, about making your own way, being strong, being an advocate. And we have to start with that. If we're going to talk about a transition plan, and we're going to talk about young people entering adulthood, and this is also not a one and done. You don't just transition to a day program and a residential program and that's it. Transition is a long process. Making your way in adult life is a long process. And it's really important that whose voice gets heard through all of this? The disabled person, the person with special needs, right? And sometimes as parents and family members and guardians, it can be so hard because we're very used to just making all of the decisions, and we have people with varying skill sets. And so I just wanted to start off today by talking about making sure that that voice comes into play, that that voice is part of the plan. All right? So, who agrees with me? Yeah. Now, who agrees that that's easy? No. So what are some ways that we can make sure that we are accounting for the wishes of our disabled loved one, our special needs person? How can we include them? Yes. Ask them. Yeah. It's pretty straightforward, right? How many people have been to a DDS ISP meeting? Okay. And how many people have been to that meeting when the person who was the object of the meeting was included in the meeting? Most of you. Okay. So how long were they at the meeting? 5 minutes? 10 minutes? Who was there the whole time? Couple people the whole time. But there's less and less hands, right? Okay. And at that meeting, the person who the meeting was about, how much did they get to say during that meeting? How many questions were asked of them? Or was it a fair amount? One person.
For my daughter, it was just a few questions because everybody had something to share, and we're trying to include her as much as possible, but there's a lot going on. So
yeah. So I find that a lot of times with meetings like that, there's a lot of boxes that need to get checked off. There's paperwork that needs to get signed. There's regulations and rules that need to be adhered to. And we become much more form over substance. We got to get this done. And we all know what we're doing, right? So, and we all know what this person needs. So let's just make sure that we are doing what we need to do to make this meeting adhere to the rules that we have, and then let's get this plan out. But frankly, this plan, which is a 2-year plan with an update in between at the year mark, or maybe several times along, this is the service delivery plan for your loved one, right? It is really about their entire life. Today, I got between 4 and 5 o'clock, I got a series of emails from somebody that I support. And they started out like this. I hate this ... ing house. This is not my home. I don't want to live here anymore. I've been trying to make plans with my friend so-and-so. They keep telling me I have no money. Why don't I have any money? They keep telling me that they have to cancel plans. And it just goes on and on and on. So his plan is certainly not supporting him in the things that he wants to do. And we know a lot of what happens with people. Well, they're short-staffed. I hear that all the time. They only have one van. The van is in the shop, so now they have to get a loaner van from another house. Somebody else that lives in the house is having a hard time, so they can't spare the staff. And it just goes on and on. So these are the things that really bother me, because getting a plan together isn't just about writing a bunch of things down on paper. It's really about a person and their life. And I think to myself, how would I feel if I was living in this home with all of these people who are taking care of me, and I can't go out when I want to go out, and I can't decide what fun things I want to do, and it's just always not about me. And I can imagine that would be extremely frustrating. I can't even imagine having my freedom and my life limited in that way. I'm sure that that's occurred to most, if not all of you, right? Yeah. So on that happy note, this is how we're going to start talking about transition planning today, and about our kids and our loved ones as they are, fully entering into adulthood. We can talk about a lot of legal things, and I'm happy to do that today. Transition plans and transition planning from the legal perspective is really about three key areas. There's your public benefits, and so that includes school if you're still in school, and what state agencies are going to deliver services and supports and money. Things like Mass Health, our state Medicaid program, Social Security, and other kinds of health insurance, and all of those kind of public benefits in one big area, housing supports and so forth. And then from the legal perspective on this side, we have legal authority. So who is going to continue making decisions? How are those decisions going to get made? How much authority is going to be left to the person, and how much is going to be given to somebody else? And that's where we start talking about guardianship and alternatives to guardianship. And right smack dab in the middle is our special needs estate planning, because we use trusts as a means to make sure that the rest of the planning that we're doing doesn't get upended. We want to make sure that we still have access to those public benefits, that we are providing resources for somebody's lifetime, that we are providing the people that we're going to need to achieve that plan. And, we want to do it in a way that's individual to our family and our loved one. And that's what your special needs plan looks like and where that comes in. So those are kind of the three-legged stool from a legal perspective of transition planning. So I thought that we would start with some categories and just kind of start talking about some things. Does that sound good? All right. What should we tackle first? Anybody? Burning questions, burning things that are bothering you right now, or stuff that you really want to know more about? Yeah.
My daughter graduated this spring, and now that she is no longer kind of in the public school system, where do I turn for just information or help?
Oh, for what though? Where do you turn for information? Your daughter just graduated.
Yes.
Can you hear, or do I need to repeat the questions? Okay. So just graduated, and you're looking for a place to turn for help.
Well, she has a program for this year, but for after that, I'm wondering what she'll do.
Mm-hmm. So that should be part of your individualized transition plan when you're leaving high school. If somebody gets a 688 referral, which is a referral to an adult service agency, and most of our kids who go to school until 22 or close thereto are going to get referred to an adult service agency. That 688 referral comes along with an ITP, a transition plan that gets done usually in the last year that you're receiving school services. So that's generally the first place to start. Does that make sense?
I can go back to she went to Algonquin. I can go back there and say, she graduated last spring, now she's in a one-year college program. And I can go back there after this year is up and say.
Is the college program part of her transition plan?
I think so. I'm not sure.
Was that what was recommended in her IEP and her transition planning form as part? So she's still under the school district.
Okay.
And so that's where you would need to go. And did she get referred to an adult service agency?
I don't think she did.
Oh, okay. So if you don't get referred to an adult service agency, that's a whole different story. Now, 688 referrals are very interesting because they're really supposed to be done by your school district, but not every school district refers when you think they should, or refers to the agency that you think should be your main agency that's going to develop your plan and then see your child through their adult services. So you, as the parent, can also make a referral into an adult service agency. And we do have an organization, an agency in our state called the Bureau of Transition Planning. So if you have any questions or concerns about the way that your child is transitioning to adulthood, you can actually contact them and ask some questions or seek some assistance. Now, there's really only one person that works there, so it's not a huge organization, but they really, really do help. I mean, she answers her phone, so, you know.
Is that the training 22 or after?
So that is to transition through at 22 from school to adult life. Okay? Not every single person is going to get referred to an adult service agency, but most people who stay in school till 22 are probably going to get referred. And our three main agencies are, does everybody know? Who are we talking about? DDS. DDS. Who else? MRC, Mass Rehab Commission, and DMH, right. So one of those three is going to write your transition plan for you and then get you started. And that transition plan is that individualized transition plan just for that final year to transition to adult services and adult life. And it is not the same as your transition planning form that gets attached in the teenage years to your IEP. Okay? All right. Yes?
Could you talk to us about
I gotta take this off.
guardian? And in the light of your Bon Jovi, It's My Life, and all that, what is your thinking about guardianship?
You mean, am I in favor of guardianship, or?
What do you tell your clients about whether they should become a guardian?
Well, that's going to be pretty individual depending on the family. And I may get rotten eggs thrown at me, but I really prefer guardianship. I know that's not the latest party line. I think that for most of our kiddos at 18, even if they are on a really great track, they're not prepared to take on the mountain of things that need to be handled in early adulthood. So you may have somebody who's very capable with day-to-day things, but is not really up to the task of being able to make some pretty big decisions. And advocacy is a big deal. So as we start talking about things like, oh, well, I need an ITP, and I need to approach my town because they didn't refer me to the right 688 referral, and I need to, now go to the Bureau of Transition Planning because, I don't agree with what's going on here, and I didn't get prioritized for DDS, and, DMH is not offering me any services. So you would think that as the parent and the natural support, you could just step in and do everything that you need to do to support this person without guardianship. But in my practice, I just don't see that to be true. So again, throw your rotten eggs at me. I get it. I actually close guardianships when people are in their mid-20s, late 20s, when they get settled and they are on a good track and they have a good team that's in place that can really help and support them in decision making. That's not true for everybody. It's not even half the people that I work with, but I really do favor guardianship because there are too many battles to be fought over scarce resources. Does anybody disagree with me? I'm happy to have a conversation about that because I know supported decision making is really being pushed, and it's a big thing. Yeah.
I would just throw out there that depending on what programs you're looking for, you can't always have a guardian. I'm Beth Gutierrez. I work at Advocacy. I'm the Adult Family Care Program Director. And to have a paid caregiver, we can't pay guardians.
Yes.
Not that you can't
Stupidest rule on the planet, by the way.
We're still fighting it. But I'm not, so just be careful on how you're planning things to know who and what can access the
Yeah.
resources.
So that's only for family care, adult family care payments, and for PCA services. That's it. Yes.
But there are ways to work around that.
Yes, there are.
I'm my son's guardian, and my husband is not.
Right.
So then he gets the
100%.
additional payment. So you just kind of got to know ahead of time, because my first thought was both of us being guardians. If
Mhm.
something ever happened to one of us, the other one would be
Yes.
there. We'll just have to find a, copy of something like that happens.
Mhm.
There are ways.
Yes. Yes, my dear.
I'm Diane, I work at Advocacy also. I'm just curious, if you put the other hat on, what are the pros as far as supported decision making?
So I actually don't really have much that I think is a pro on supported decision making. As an attorney, if somebody can really be supported in their decision making, but be the primary decision maker, then I think that we should be using our tried and true powers of attorney and healthcare proxies and HIPAA releases. Those are documents that are legal, people understand them. We're not bringing in an agency or an organization to be, the supported decision-making team. That is an argument that people have thrown out to me. Well, I think that, if somebody doesn't have a team, doesn't have family, doesn't have, close people, a supported decision-making team with an agency or an organization is better than having some stranger like me, attorney Annette Hines, be your guardian. So I just think that it would be better to actually have real legal documents that have the same significance, because that person, if they are somebody who would be a good candidate for supported decision making, they have capacity to sign and understand those documents, appointing people to assist them. So how many people here have done their own estate planning and have signed their own powers of attorney and healthcare proxies for themselves? Okay, at least half. Yeah, more than half. So those documents are great for anybody over the age of 18, and when we do our planning, we will often, if there are adult children that are in college or just kind of starting their adult life, we'll often recommend that we get those documents signed for them as well, because they're just good documents for every adult to have. You need somebody who can step in a crisis to make some decisions for you. So does that make sense, Diane? I mean, from my perspective, does my perspective, okay. What else? Yes.
I just wanted to share my reason for getting a guardianship versus for decision making.
Mm-hmm.
My son could not make financial decisions,
Mm-hmm.
but any decisions he can make, I discuss with him.
Yes.
So it might not be the legal definition of supported decision making,
Right.
still making whatever decision. And so in my opinion, it should know how.
Yeah. So what's your name? Veronica makes such an excellent point. So a lot of people don't really understand that the guardianship statute actually requires you to do what you just talked about. And I think a lot of our issues really lie in not training our guardians very well to understand what their responsibilities are, what their role really is. It is not to completely circumvent and subvert every decision that this person would make. You absolutely must, under the law, take their wishes into consideration and discuss as many and as much decision making with them as is possible. For some people, that's going to be all of their life choices, and for others, it's going to be a smaller subset. But the guardian really needs to do that. Now, as a mom, I can tell you that that is not easy. And I think the biggest chief complaint that our state agencies have, and a lot of our provider agencies have, is that parents have a hard time stepping back. This is a different hat that you wear. Being a guardian is not the same as being a parent. And you really do, over time, during transition years, need to evolve that relationship. It's just really, really tough to do. And I had a question. Yes?
Did you say there was an age at which you stop guardianship?
No, not really an age, but when I have people that are getting settled and they are maybe now in their adult residence, they maybe have stable day supports in place, depending on what's going on, we will look at that as a time when we can pull the guardianship away and move into more supported decision making with documents. And I have one going on right now with somebody who has autism and who has been able to move into their own apartment, does get quite a bit of support from their agency and some support from DDS, but is working 2 different jobs, drives, and could not have done all of this at 18. But it took, this period of time to get a good plan in place, a good support plan in place. And he is having a really difficult time with his parents right now because he doesn't want this guardianship, and it is interfering with their relationship. So this is a good way for them to take a step back, acknowledge and appreciate the great gains that he's made, and find a different way to support him. And again, this is not everybody. This is not even 50% of the families that I see, but it is a possibility. Guardianship does not have to be forever. And you also probably know that it does not have to be 100% of the decisions. Most guardianships going forward now are going to be limited in nature. So any other questions about the adult foster care? Because that was a really good point that came up. And, choosing one family member to be the guardian and one family member to be the care provider can be good, but I do worry sometimes that people are really kind of pushed into this one-size-fits-all for AFC, and you need to think about what you're entering into. It's not just, great, here's some more money. For those of you who don't know what AFC is, it's a cash payment that gets made through our state Medicaid program, and it gets made to a family caregiver who is living in the same house with the person that they're providing care for. It means that they have to be available. An agency is going to need to do paperwork with you. The person does need to qualify, meaning that they need to have, certain assistance every day, every week. And, I do have families for whom the payment is not worth the, the effort, if you will. The what? The aggravation. I didn't want to say aggravation because, but it's somebody coming into your house every month. It's, it's.
There's pros and cons for everybody.
Yes.
It doesn't fit everybody. It doesn't fit every need, and there's other options too. So it's
right.
I'm totally fine walking you through that.
Yes.
It's not one and done, but it is an option that is in
Yeah.
the arsenal.
Some people really, that extra support when DDS is not going to be supporting you for many years to come, that can be, the be-all and the end-all to being able to keep your person home. But it's a complicated issue that needs to be discussed. It's not really, this is awesome, it's free money. It just needs to be in the context of the entire rest of the plan. I've had people come to me and want, husband to be the care provider, and he travels 5-6 days a week, 20 days a month. That's just not a care provider. It's not in name only. It's not, we're just going to put this down on paper. It really is the person responsible for providing the care. And, there have been some cases in the last couple of years where Medicaid has really cracked down on some provider agencies over, they're just kind of not any agencies we know, but they're just, putting people's names down on forms and, processing payments and not really doing what needs to get done. Okay? Yes.
Back to guardianship. For the clients that use the power of attorney and healthcare proxy instead of going the guardianship way,
Mm-hmm.
a separate document for educational power of attorney or DDS spokesperson?
So that would be an agency agreement or an advocacy agreement. And usually we just put that into a special power of attorney, and we will list out, special powers that we wouldn't have in everybody's power of attorney. My experience is that those kinds of documents are not really well received overall because they don't see that as a legal document, and really they just want you to fill out their forms, each agency. So that can be a complicating factor, but we do write it into our powers of attorney usually, because that's where I think the advocacy comes under. Yes.
I'm a little lost.
I'm sorry. Let's take a step back and catch you up.
Okay, guardianship. Like I have a 26-year-old.
Okay.
She can sign her own name and she can understand, but to make like a real health decision about her health,
Right.
she can't do stuff like that or understand real financial.
Mm-hmm.
So
Did you
that's
seek?
what I'm confused about.
Did you
I
seek
don't have
guardianship? You
for
don't.
her.
Okay.
But I have had, like, her doctor, as long as she gives me permission to talk to the doctor, I'm allowed to talk to the doctor. I haven't had any problems with anything like that.
So
I mean, would I want guardianship?
That's-
Or what power of attorney? I'm
Well,
lost.
I don't want to, kind of get to know you for 30 seconds and give you legal advice. But let me just talk generally about some things that can happen when people are able to go through the early years, the early adult years without guardianship. And then some crisis hits and we realize how important it is to have the guardianship. You're in a system right now where you're dealing with people that know your family, and they have accepted those releases, and they've accepted, that you're still in the mix and helping to make decisions. But let's say that you end up in an ER somewhere where the doctors don't really know your daughter, and they, and she's not going to be able to give permission to release information to you because she's, not able to communicate right now. She's had a seizure, she's in a coma, she's had an accident, she's very anxious, whatever the case may be. The release that you give to your doctor is not a blanket release for everybody. So it's possible that you could have a healthcare proxy and a power of attorney signed. It's possible that your daughter, that would be an appropriate planning technique for you and your family. But you need to do something that's more global. And you need to think about next generation too. Because one of the biggest challenges that I see in my practice is when siblings or other family members need to step in. All of a sudden, the doctor that's been talking to the family for 40 years won't do it with the siblings, won't, stretch themselves and do it with the cousin. And we do, unfortunately, guardianships for people in their 40s and 50s who've never had it before. And it happens so often that our judges are actually very familiar with it. They'll even ask, like, oh, yeah, mom or dad, passed away or sick or whatever. And they understand that when, brother Bobby needs to take over, you're just not going to have that same relationship with the care providers. And it makes sense. So it's probably better to get some consultation now and think this through, because you have a for now issue and then you have a for later issue. And you want to have some continuity in your thought about what that looks like. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay, good. And I had a question back here somewhere. Yes. I see that elephant over there. That's the elephant in the room. Every time I go out to talk. Housing, yes.
I've heard people tell me you need to start applying for housing 6-7 years in advance to be actually needed. There's a wait list.
Yes. So that is really going to depend on your kiddo's needs. But let's talk about housing. Where do people find housing? Where do people with disabilities live? Where do people with disabilities live? Tell me. Where are some of your people living? Home. Where else? Where's your son live? He lives. And who pays for that?
Well, ours is private, but we also have AFC money.
Okay. And where else? Does anybody else have? Does anybody have anybody living in the community in a voucher program or any community housing? No? Okay. Interesting. All right. So the ways that people get their housing and the kinds of places that people live does depend on what their needs are to be able to be in the community. So many people in the IDDD world, the intellectual disability, developmental disability world, naturally lean towards trying to get DDS money, Department of Developmental Services, to fund a residential program. Your person needs to be prioritized by DDS to priority 1, and that means that they need 24-hour care, 24-hour services in order for them to get a residential placement package, if you will, which I know is kind of a vulgar way of saying it, but that's what it is. It's a package of funding, services, and supports that provides 24-hour care. DDS looks like this: group home, shared living. That's pretty much it, if they are providing 24-hour supports. There are also 2 other community living waivers that DDS provides, which can provide less than 24-hour supports. And those people can be living at home. They can be living in the community in a private setting where there's an amalgam of ways of paying for the residential services. And they can be living independently with supports, and DDS can provide some money funding for that. So, but primarily people are looking at group homes, shared living for DDS. Now, DDS is really only providing supports to people who are at the top tier of need, because it is not a mandated service. What does that mean when I say that? Do you guys know? What does that mean? Not a mandated service. It's not automatic. It's not an entitlement. You may need the services very badly, but if there's no money in the budget, you're not going to get it. It's a way of kind of waitlisting without saying waitlisting, because we can't say that anymore because of lawsuits. So priority, there has to be some way of dishing out scarce resources, namely funding, for people. And that's the way that we do it. DDS also only does 24-hour residential care for people with intellectual disabilities, not for people with autism and no intellectual disabilities. So if you don't meet that ID criteria, you are not going to get funded for residential services and supports from DDS. DMH also pays for residential supports, but it's pretty rare to get DMH-funded group homes or DMH-funded residential living. They are generally meant to be short-term, like a step-down program, before somebody goes back into the community and accesses the community again. So although there are times when people stay in DMH housing for a long, long time, that's not the norm, and they do a lot less of this than DDS does. Okay, and it's a very different model. The payment model is very different. So those are our 2 main agencies. You also have Mass Commission for the Blind, the Commission for Deaf and Hard of Hearing, who may also be an agency that provides funding and supports. But again, those are going to be on a much, much smaller scale. So that's the start of how people find and access housing, and that's the tip of the iceberg, because the number of people that are going to be funded in that way is very, very small compared with all of the people with disabilities between the ages of 18 and 65 who need some form of housing. You had a question?
I do. Our son is in that very small criteria.
Mm-hmm.
24-hour services for the rest of his life. So would we talk with DDS about, how do you get that started with them? You call them and say, I want to put on a list?
So is he already in at over 22 at this time? So that whole process should have happened when he was between 20 and 22 of getting prioritized.
I believe that it did, that he is a priority to get him onto DDS.
If he was a priority 1, you would have heard about it by now. So how you get that process started is you got to understand the process. You really have to understand what you're asking for too. So the DDS process, for those of you who don't know, is like multi-layered. It starts out just with the initial eligibility at around 18. And that's, hey, are you a person who's domiciled in Massachusetts? Believe it or not, that's not always a given because we have people who go to school here whose parents live elsewhere. And so that can be an issue. So once you're over that domicile hump, which is not residency, it's domicile is a higher standard, then they look at, hey, do you have an intellectual disability or not? And if you don't, do you fit into one of these developmental disability categories, in which case you will get a lower level of service, but not residential services. If you are somebody that, fits into that very, top tier criteria, and you are somebody with an intellectual disability, the next step before you transition to adulthood, which, like I said, happens sometime between the age of 20 and 22, usually when they're 21, is you get prioritized. And that means that somebody comes out and they do a math cap and an ICAP, which is scoring the person's needs and the family's ability as caregivers to provide those needs. And those scores are added up, and then you get a decision as to whether you are a priority 1 or a priority 2. If you're a priority 1, you're going to get served in the 6 to 12 month range, and you're going to get a budget. And then you're going to start the planning process with them to develop a service plan. If you are a priority 2, you're going to wait a really, really long time, like decades, unless something changes in your family, most likely.
They said that's through DDS.
Yes.
They come to your home.
Well, they will do the assessments wherever.
That's not adult family care.
No,
Different.
it's completely different. Yes. Yes.
I would like to add, just in case it helps someone, about priority 1 and getting housing. My son is now 25 and he's in a group home. And my husband and I thought he really would have been able to go into residential housing when he was like in his teens, probably. He was very,
Yeah.
tough to be. People couldn't go there still taking care of him. But my husband and I said, we'll keep him till he's 22, that, and then we'll go home. So when we, every year at his IEP, they would say, do you want home services or whatever during his IEP meeting, and he'd be like, no,
Right.
no. So then when he's, 21, where, like, yeah, we want group home, to put him in group home, and he's 22, and he'll no longer be in the school system
Mhm.
anyway. And then that's when they say, oh, it's almost impossible to get into a group home, get residential services, unless you're already there when you're 22. And I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, people, that's nothing short of a miracle. And they did come out and do their
Mhm.
school, but the paperwork is about, probably this much paperwork to fill out, and then they come out and everything. He was truly a priority 1.
Yes.
They found a group home for him. But, my husband and I thought we were kind of sort of doing the right thing, like keeping things as long as we possibly could. And in the end, I really couldn't really do but
Right.
he should have been, like, in order, we were lucky, we were told, the only reason why we could got that is just that he's so clearly, and they also said there's not even housing, even if you are a priority one.
Yes.
It's not like you get to go out and there's like, 10 choices. It's like.
If you get 2, you're lucky.
I had a 22-year-old and there was a bed
Yes.
in a house with men in their 40s and 50s.
Yes.
None of them verbal, and it was take it or keep them home.
So this is just a really
That's what it's really like.
good point to make, and then I know I have a question back here. So the point that you are making is so important. You have to understand what you're fighting for, because you can't just go out and tour group homes. There's privacy issues, and you can't just go out and say, oh, I want to see what it looks like. I want to see what a group home looks like. Just like you would go tour 12 different apartments to see where you wanted to live. So it's a whole different world with living in any kind of a shared living environment where you're sharing space with other people who have their own needs, and you are being funded by organizations and the government. The rights are not the same, and it's very challenging. So you do need to think strategically about your transition plan. You do need to start looking at this long before age 21, or long before you need it. And, but first and foremost, you need to be honest about what is going to be okay for you, and, how you're going to manage, because you are going to get that situation where they have one bed available, and just the fact that they talk like that. Oh, we have one home for you to move in. No, we have one bed available for you. That's what you're getting, a bed. And you don't always get a great match with housemates, and it's very challenging. It's a tough life that we live in right now. But when you need it, and you move forward with that. Is it impossible, nearly impossible, to have your kid home until 22 and then get a priority one? I think the only reason they're saying that is because if you've been able to stay home until 22, the likelihood is that you're not going to meet that criteria, okay? So that's really where the issue lies, is that you're not going to meet the criteria.
Just because
All right.
he's 22?
Nope, because you've been able to keep him home and you're an available caregiver. So they look at the person's needs, and they may have very high needs, but if we have caregivers available to take care of that person, that is considered when they're figuring out whether to dole out the scarce resources they have for your child. Okay? So you may have somebody with very high needs, but you may be doing very well taking care of them at home. And I have somebody recently that I've been working with who I almost fell down that got priority one, because I don't see their needs as that high, but they have no caregivers, and that's the issue. So those things get balanced. All right. Did I have a question in the back? Comment.
We are your transition team here. We sit in on a lot of your transition meetings. And through the process that we have to take, we receive your referral probably a couple months prior to your adult child turning 22. And when we sit in on your end of IEP meeting, one of the questions that you're asked, and I remember specifically for the Dds over here, or Sean, they were told that there was no residential support to support their son, and they offered AFC. As your adult children are coming through the process and are here with us over time, one of the things I must really instill in you is your voice, because you are the ones that make the difference, and you cannot stop talking and asking that question, even beyond the ISP. So we're here to support you. We can only go so far. A success story. Unfortunately, this mom wasn't here today. She worked for 2 years to get her son, who has a diagnosis of autism, not ID, who
Yes. So, 5 key steps to effective advocacy. So, these are really important, and I want you to start practicing them early. The communication piece, I love what you said about, we need to hear your voice, and we need to hear it early, and we need to hear it often. So keep this with you. On the front side is your transition checklist, so that you can start looking at these key areas of transition as soon as your kid is a teenager. And if you're just starting now and they're in their 20s, that's okay. Transition is a long process. And you want to make sure that you are addressing the issues in these boxes. Not everybody is going to have the same set of issues in every single box, and everybody's plan is going to look different. But it's just a guide. For those of you who are watching us live streaming, just email us and we will send this to you, I promise. For those of you who want to stay in touch, I have a sign-up sheet back there to get our newsletter and our blog. We do not spam you, I promise. Anybody who's on our list knows that. We only send out good information about local resources, things that are going on, events, and any new trends in anything special needs law related. So becoming
22-year-olds last year into this building, and only one of them received residential services into a group home.
right. And you will find that DDS will push you to AFC because, they know that most of your kids are not going to qualify right away, but also once you get AFC, that's considered a residential support, and now they can check off on your list that you have supports in place. It's a little tricky, but they're doing it because they know that they're not going to be able to provide supports. It costs a lot of money to support our kids. There's a lot of regulations, and group home environments have to spend a lot of money to get good care, and we want that care to be good. So there's only so much to go around. It's really important that you get your child on adult mass health so that if and when it's time for them to get some residential supports or some other community-based supports from DDS, that you can apply for the waiver services. That helps our state because they're going to get federal dollars reimbursed to them at about 50 cents on the dollar, sometimes a little bit higher. And that is very helpful to be able to serve more people. So having mass health is very important. And you can get mass health by automatically qualifying for SSI. SSI is going to get you your mass health right away. But you can still get mass health even if you don't qualify for SSI, or if you're on an SSDI program, you can still get mass health. And there are ways to actually get mass health if you're over income as well, if you are a working disabled adult. So those are other things on your transition plan that you need to look at over the beginning years, starting at age 18. For Social Security, it's 18. For mass health, it's 19. And those are going to be important pieces, that kind of the tree to the trunk of your transition plan. Yes? Sure. So Charles River Center is just like Advocates. It's just an example of a provider agency that has supports and services. And some provider agencies have opportunities to do cost sharing and do some private and public funding together. So I'm not sure about Advocates. You can let us know if you do. But TIL and JFCS, they have housing that has some private public partnership options. And Advocates does as well. Good to know. So that means that even if you don't get prioritized, you may be able to financially plan for some kind of congregate living, and that has some supports that comes along with it. And you just need to figure out what those costs are going to be and how you're going to put your little jigsaw puzzle together of funding and supports to match up to a good life plan for your kid.
Any idea where those funding estimates would come from?
So AFC is one of them. Foster care payments can be one of them. Social Security is going to be another piece. And
Pieces, but you said come up with a financial estimate of how much it's going to cost.
right, so let's take, I wish we could do an advocate's example. The average, supported home is going to run somewhere between $3,000 to $5,000 a month, depending on the level of support that a person needs. And you can kind of compare it a little bit to some kind of elderly living situations as well before you get to that nursing home level. But as people start to move into continuing levels of care when they get older, assisted living being one of them, other kinds of congregate care, that's what we're looking at for our younger people as well. So you may have to kick in some private dollars to make that work, but there can be some combination of public services and supports as well. It's just going to look different for everybody.
Now, but did you say that some of the money was going to be Social Security and some was AFC?
Possibly.
But won't AFC stop once you stop living at home anymore?
So there's a different kind of adult foster care program for people who, to pay the agency that's caring for them. Okay? So there's a family care piece and then there's a foster care piece. Okay? It's complicated. Yeah, it's complicated. Start early and, take a look at all of the things that are a possibility for you. So other housing things that come up, there are, lists of private organizations that have large residential communities like Avalon, for example, and they get tax credits for providing low-income housing to people in these categories. And so you just need to know when those spots become available in certain housing, certain communities like that. And one of the places you can go to for that information is your local independent living center. So I would recommend connecting with Metro West Independent Living Center because they get lists of all of those places that are opening up spots, and there's usually a lottery for them, and they will make sure that they push that list out to all of the people that are on their list as well. So the independent living centers can be really helpful in helping you put together your jigsaw puzzle. They have a lot of experience. Their services are free. They do a great job. The folks here at Metro West Independent Living Center are phenomenal. They do so much with a few staff people and a small budget. They're amazing. Okay, and then there's Section 8. So, yeah, let's talk about Section 8. And also other kinds of public housing partnerships as well. So every town, just about, has their own public housing. In some places, it's a lot nicer than others. I live in Natick. Our public housing for disabled and elderly, it's really nice, and it's in a safe area, and it comes with, some natural supports like having, the red emergency buttons and handicap accessibility and things like that. Maybe in your town it's not as desirable. It's hard to know. The lists for Section 8 vouchers as compared to your static housing in your town are just about double. So the typical wait for housing in a town or community project, if you will, is going to be maybe anywhere from 2 to 5 years. But and of course that's not true of Boston or maybe Worcester, but the average town, that's probably going to be about it. Vouchers for the state, which are portable, those are our Section 8 vouchers, at least 8 to 10 years, unless you have some priorities and emergencies that move you up on the list. So when the question gets asked, like, do I have to start planning 6 or 7 years out? You got to plan about 10 years out if you're planning on using a Section 8 voucher. Yes. What's so great about those vouchers? Well, the portability is what's so great about the vouchers, because they can move around the state. It's a voucher that you can take to a landlord and say, hey, I have a voucher and I'd really like to rent your apartment, which means that you have a lot of choice. What's wrong with what I just said? Does anybody know? Landlords don't want Section 8. They have limited number who will accept Section 8. So why is that? The amount of rent that the government's willing to pay. So my sister used to own a 3-family in East Boston. That's where I grew up. And we grew up really poor. So she wanted to help people like us. And she wanted to offer one of her apartments as a Section 8 apartment. So after she went through the process of getting an inspection and fixing all the things that they said that she had to fix, it turns out that the market rent that they assessed was less than 75% of what the true market rent was for that apartment. So if she wants to do this nice thing for somebody, she actually has to take a hit in what she's able to charge, because you as the recipient of the voucher cannot make up the difference. So let's just run through a number example so we understand. Let's say that market rent for the apartment is $1,500, which would actually be quite a small apartment in Boston these days. But they assess the market rent at $1,200. That $1,200 is what the government says is the maximum that gets paid for that apartment. The person who is going to live in that apartment, the voucher recipient, only has to pay the 30% of their income. And then the rest gets made up by the government. So let's say their 30% was $200. Then the government will pay the remaining $1,000. But your apartment owner is still short $300 for what they really could get on the open market. The problem with that is that, if you are a small landlord, you really can't do that. If you rely on that rent to pay your mortgage and you have a little blip, you're in trouble. I mean, that is $3,600 less a year than you could get for that apartment. So that makes it really difficult for people to go out and find places to use their voucher in our neck of the woods in the Northeast. But they can still do it. So a lot of families are able to do things with their own homes. So that is something that you may want to consider. There's good news and bad news with that. It's actually not that challenging to make a separate space in a home that has a kitchen, somewhat of a kitchen space, separate bathroom, separate entrance. If you are doing that, you get to set the rent. So you can just set the rent at whatever the market rent is that the government says it is. So you're over that hump. But what's the next problem that you have to tackle? Providing support, income. Yes, it is income to you, which is not the biggest deal on the planet, but it's definitely a factor. You still have to figure out what the supports are going to be. That's true. But what's the biggest challenge? What's the biggest problem? Yeah, that's not a permanent solution. Most of our housing solutions are not permanent solutions, though. So we do have to recognize that we may have a plan that has different stages of life attached to it. And this may be the best thing that we can do for the next 10 or 20 or even 30 years, but we still need to think about what happens next after that. Okay? Any questions about that?
Don't the vouchers
Yes.
run out after a certain amount of time, so you have to use it or you lose
If you come up on the list, you can defer once. And you do have time to get ready to find a place. So if that's what you're asking me, do they run out? You do have a certain period of time to be able to use the voucher, or you're going to go to the bottom of the list. Okay. Yes.
Another question on the voucher. So in your example, like if a landlord does that and somebody's been living there for, 15 years, can the landlord then decide, well, I really want to get market for this.
Yes.
I don't want to do this anymore and kick the person out? And
Yes.
they have to give them, whatever.
Well, they have landlord-tenant rights, which, by the way, you don't have in a group home. No landlord-tenant rights.
So if that scenario happens,
Yes.
what, then the person had the voucher, whose responsibility would it be to find them another, place to live? Because you're saying, right now, it takes 10 years? So if this person has had a voucher and they
No,
live
so-
in this apartment and then they get, the landlord's like, nope, not doing it
Okay.
anymore, how do they get something?
So their voucher is still good, and it's portable, so it can go with them wherever they go next. But who's responsible for finding that home?
But is the person going to be, homeless until they find someplace else to, if that doesn't...
I've seen that happen. Yes.
So that, technically, that could happen.
Yes.
You just have nowhere to go until
So-
they go to a bottom of a list, though. I guess that's what...
No, they're still going to have their voucher, and if they do end up in a homeless shelter or homeless somehow and getting services as a homeless person, they won't lose their voucher. Okay? Because they're still seeking housing.
I don't want to say together enough because it sounds insulting, but I don't mean it that way.
Yeah.
But they have to be able to...
Remember that conversation we had about guardianship, people?
They have to have the ability...
This is one of those times.
Another place to live.
Right, right,
They have to do that.
right.
It's not...
The guardian.
but-
Or their natural support team. Yeah. Has to be able to find some place for them to live. Fortunately, we have really strong landlord-tenant rules and rights. So you are going to have some time. If you haven't done anything wrong, like not paid the rent, you are going to have some time to find new housing. And many landlords will actually pay out a settlement to get somebody out faster. Yeah.
It's not the responsibility of whoever issued that, the housing, whatever agency or whatever, I don't know, issued that voucher.
No, it's coming from the state government, so
State government,
no.
it's
No.
It's not their responsibility. to
No.
find something for the person.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
Let's take the native community housing authority. I don't live in Native. Can I put my child on the waiting list?
Yes. You can put your child on the waiting list for any housing authority for local housing. But if you don't live in the town, you're going to be lower on the list than people who have a priority because they live in the town already. Okay? There's a whole, if you have never filled out an application, there's a whole list of check boxes, and you're going to add up what all of those priorities are so that you can move up higher on the list. Okay? Okay. Does anybody have questions about special needs planning or special needs trusts? 1, 2. Let's start back.
I want to ask about the, my son's going to turn 22,
Yes.
but he's doing very well, and I want him back to live with me.
Okay.
In a housing. So what do you recommend? Am I going to have a support?
Yeah.
He's living with me after he turns 20.
Is he his own guardian, or are you his? You're his guardian.
Yeah, he's in a residential placement, and he lives in a group home.
So you have a lot to consider, because if you take him out of that setting and bring him back home, you're setting yourself up for a very long wait to get any residential services again. Okay? Decades. Oh yes, unless something happens to you, decades.
If something happens to me, somebody's gonna
But that should not be the only part of your decision-making process. I mean, you have to do what's right for your family. You can't just say, oh, well, I'm going to lose out on funding if I don't take it right now. I mean, this is all about your family, and you need to sit down with somebody and make a plan.
No, I'm not family. It's all myself.
You are a family. You're a family of two. And so what's, yeah, I would suggest making an appointment with the Independent Living Center in Framingham, because they really can help guide you to making some good decisions about supporting him back in your home, I think. Okay? They have a good transition person there. So yeah, that's not school, right? That's an adult program, a day program. So it's not school. It's different. Yeah. And don't mistake it for school, because it doesn't look anything like school. It's very different. Those community-based day support programs are really good, but it's not school. So I just wanted to make sure that you understood that. Okay.
I want to know if you're going to provide something for him to keep him busy.
During the program or after?
For PCA services, someone to share in the morning, then
stay
he'll go
free.
out, and then someone will get home.
Yeah.
Almost like that.
Yeah, something like that.
So you have to bring an agency in that provides PCA services and have them do an evaluation for whether he qualifies for any PCA hours. And then PCAs are somewhat limited in what they can do, so you have to think through whether that's the right option for you. But the key here is that you have to put all of these pieces together. There's nobody out there who's going to do it for you. You are the planner. You are the person who has to find the PCAs, who has to train them, tell them what to do, where to go. You want him to go to a concert. You need to buy the tickets. You need to figure out how he's getting there. You've got to figure out the transportation. It's all you. You are now the care manager. You are the person who has to do all of this if he's living at home with you. Yes.
We have a question from Facebook.
Woohoo!
Can a guardian live out of state?
Yes. Legally, of course. They are very unlikely to take a guardian out of the country. So if you have family members that don't live here in the U.S., you really want to consider before you name them. The reason for that is because they can't haul them into court. We can't bond them and haul them into court if we don't like what's going on. Also, they're just not going to be that available. So if you have out-of-state guardians, you just need to think carefully about whether they're going to be able to fulfill the role, the responsibilities of the guardianship. It's not just get together once a year for a meeting with DDS. You know, you really need to have eyes on the person. Even the best organizations, the best agencies can slip a little bit. We have all heard some pretty horrible stories out there. So we know that whoever that guardian is responsible for making sure that this person is happy and healthy and being cared for. Any more Facebook questions? Nope? Okay. Yes.
What do you think of trust protectors?
I like them. We draft a lot of trust protectors in. It depends on the language that you want to use and what role you want them to play. But we're seeing...
Trust protectors first.
What? I'm sorry?
Can you define that?
Okay. A trust... So a trust protector is not a trustee. A trust protector is somebody who is going to be in that role of watchdog over the trustee. And we're seeing more and more people who are naming professionals or organizations as their trustees of their special needs trust, because it's kind of hard to run a special needs trust. I mean, it's hard to be a trustee of any trust in general, but a special needs trust has a lot of different rules And you really need to understand how this trust is impacting each and every public benefit that that person is on. It's hard enough as parents to understand that we have these rules for Social Security and these rules for Mass Health and these rules for a waiver program and these rules for the housing voucher and food stamps and heat assistance and on and on and on and on and on. And every time you go to make a distribution from a trust, you have to understand, does the trust allow it, and what is the impact going to be on the beneficiary when the money comes out to pay for X, Y, Z. So we're seeing more and more, and I think it's a good move, that people are turning to organizations and professionals as trustees. There's probably not enough people who do this work, but we're working on that. But the trust protector is the person who is the trusted family member, probably the guardian, somebody or some list of somebodies who are going to be intimately involved with that person. They don't need to understand the tax rules for trusts, but they really get the fact that this money needs to be spent to benefit the person. And so they generally are going to be a person who has the right to remove a trustee and replace them with another professional. That gives them a lot of power. That they have the right to get information. They can look at the statements. They really can be as involved or not involved as they want to be. It's kind of an opt-in situation. So that's what a trust protector is. That role is not legally defined except within the trust itself. So from attorney to attorney, that might look different. But you need to understand what you're looking for, and you need to go into your attorney with the goals that you are trying to reach. And they'll know how to draft to get there. So I'm very fond of trust protectors. We don't always put them in. We don't always have people that can serve in this role, unfortunately. But when we do, it's a great place for siblings to be. It's a great place for other family members to be, and family friends, and the people that are in your circle. Okay? That was a really good question. Thank you. Any other questions about trusts? Yes?
I was probably about 15 years old.
So it might be time to take a look at it. Yeah. Might want to have it reviewed just to see. It doesn't mean that there's actually anything wrong with it at all. Okay. So I think it's good every 3 to 5 years to be sitting down with your attorney and to have a relationship with your attorney. Your attorney should not be somebody that you just see once. Hopefully you're developing a relationship with somebody that you trust to be on your team and will advise you as your life changes through the years, because your documents are not going to need to be updated because the laws have changed. You're going to need to update them because your life has changed. You know, people who you had in your life back then are not in your life now. Your goals for your family members have changed. Maybe your oldest child who was going to do XYZ has decided to move to Japan and they're having a great life there, or has gone into the military, or maybe, you know, they didn't turn out quite as close to their sibling as you had hoped. So there's a lot of reasons to take another look at your plan when you're doing your transition plan overall. It's a great time to take a look at your estate plan.
Can you talk about the difference between different types of special needs trusts, the first and third party?
Yeah, sure. So there are 2 kinds of special needs trusts. Actually, there's really 3. There's first party trusts, which are funded with the disabled person's own money. Those trusts are really set up so that if the disabled person has any assets, they can still qualify for public benefits. They are a lot more complicated and have more rules associated with them than third-party special needs trusts. And you can think about it like this. If the government's going to allow you to take your own money, put it into a trust, and then they're going to pay for you, pay supports to you, pay Social Security, pay Medicaid, they want to, there's going to be certain restrictions around that transfer, and there's going to be certain restrictions around that trust. So I really want to emphasize that a lot of people make mistakes and use the wrong trust for the wrong thing, and you really need to be clear on your planning and what documents you have, because if you transfer assets one way, it's okay, but if you go the other way, you're forever tainting your trust, and it's no good anymore. So your third-party trust is funded with other people's money, and never one nickel can have, it can never hold anything that belong to the special needs person themselves. So that's where tainting the trust can be a huge problem. And your trustee, you need to understand your planning, but your trustee also really needs to understand the planning as well. So you can also use pooled trusts, and we have some good ones in Massachusetts. So if you really, really come up against not having a trustee, and you can't even think about hiring a professional to do this, you can use a pooled trust. And Plan of Massachusetts is the one that we most often refer to, but it's not the only one. And they will step in as an agency, as an organization, and be your trustee. And your money can be pooled with other people's funds to be able to keep costs down and also get the most out of investments. So there's a lot of benefit to family member trustees, there's a lot of benefit to individual professional trustees, and there's a lot of benefit to using corporations and organizations and pooled trusts. And this is really going to be another one of those individual decisions that you make.
Any issue with taking trusts across state lines?
Your trust is always going to be cited under the law that it was created under. So there's no real taking trusts across state lines. You can have the money in whatever investment vehicles the trustee thinks is appropriate. So
The trust was established in Massachusetts, and
yes.
the person the trust is for ends up in Ohio.
That happens all the time, by the way. It's not necessary to either open a new trust or change the situs of the trust. The trust gets administered for the beneficiary in another state. So the complexity around that is making sure that the person who is the trustee understands the trust law that it's being governed by, and the unique beneficiary public benefits rules that the beneficiary is under in Ohio. And so that's where you can really get some of the challenges of those relationships. But people move all the time. One of the most difficult things that happens when people get waiver services in the state that they become, a young adult in, those waiver services cannot move between states. It is almost impossible to take your waiver, unlike your housing voucher, and move from Massachusetts to Ohio, where your sibling now is after your parents have passed away. We have been trying to work on this issue for a long time. I'm actually working with Jeff Kielsen here at Advocates on some cases of people trying to move their family member, but into the state where their family is now, and it's nearly impossible to do and retain your funding. Yes.
I don't understand what you mean when you say waiver.
So that would be your DDS waiver that is paying for your 24-hour residential services and supports. If you get services, it's a Mass Health waiver, but it's not really Mass Health that administers it. They pay for the services, but it gets administered through our state DDS program. Unlike other Medicaid services, which easily transfer from state to state. So if you have somebody in the mental health system and they're receiving services under their state Medicaid program, they can move to another state, get their Medicaid up and running the day that they are boots on the ground in their new state, and then, can get services that way. But if you are receiving services through one of these intellectual disability waivers, because 50% of the program or more gets paid for by state dollars, you can't easily just transfer your whole services and supports into a new state. You have to go through their whole, whatever system they have for priority, etc. Yes.
That's what I was going to ask, but you have to go through their system.
You do. And we have people trying to come into Massachusetts all the time whose family members are here, and they can't do it and continue to get the funding. And there's no way to provide for this person without the funding because they require 24-hour care. So they basically are stuck in the state that they became an adult in, even if they have no family there. It's horrible.
So
Yes.
if somebody wants to retire and New Hampshire or Florida or something like that,
Yeah.
there's no way they can take their child with them and then establish what they have here in another state.
Highly unlikely.
Just pretty much, because I just assumed that we have to stay in Massachusetts forever.
Well, not necessarily. You can support your person in Massachusetts.
We want him with us.
Yeah.
We still see him every day.
Well, maybe someday we'll be able to solve this problem. We'll see. You have a question in the back? Did you have a question? No? Yes.
We have a question from Facebook about AFC and guardianship. Can the caregiver who's not the guardian make any decisions for the person they're caring for, or does that have to go through the guardian?
It has to go through the guardian unless you do a fancy delegation of authority, which we use all the time. But truly, the guardian is meant to be the one who makes those decisions. So, and a lot of places that you go, if you went to a medical appointment, for example, they would not necessarily accept the delegation, even though it's a legal document. So the fancier you get, and the more you stray outside of what's the norm, the harder it is to actually use it as a tool. That's a good question. Thank you. Yes?
The difference between full and plenary?
It's the same. Full and plenary guardianship are exactly the same.
So full and limited then?
So the limitations can be done in two different ways. The question was about limited guardianship versus full guardianship. Full guardianship means no rights of decision making get left to the individual under guardianship. It's pretty rare for us to be able to move forward in our courts these days with a full guardianship because the court, the judge, they're asking, why? There must be some decisions that this person can make. Can they pick their own clothes? Can they pick what they get to eat? Can they pick their friends? There are decisions that nearly everybody can make. And that goes back to the beginning of our discussion today. It's my life and having your voice heard, which I'm going to remember. That's so beautiful. And, it's just important to be thinking about those limitations. So in our state, we can do a limited guardianship, which sets out the guardian can make decisions only in these areas. More likely and more often, we're seeing a plenary or a full guardianship where we carve out rights and decision making to be left to the person under guardianship. And why we do it that way is because when somebody is 18, we don't always know and can't always project what they're going to be like when they're 30 or 40. So we want to cover all of our bases with the big decision making and make sure that we are leaving all of those unknowns to our guardian. If we go in on a limited guardianship and we say we only want healthcare decision making authority, we don't actually have authority to work with DDS. We don't have authority necessarily to go out and help somebody with employment. So you really want to be thoughtful about the limitations and what direction you're going in. And what is going to tell our judge what those limitations should look like? Our medical certificate or our clinical team report, which is our evidence of incapacity that we are putting into the court system. So they specifically are asking questions. what can this person do and what can't they do? And they're going to take a look at what this person can do, and they're going to be looking for limitations to the guardianship in those areas. Yeah.
Everything that you're saying, and I look at my daughter, we have full guardianship in her, and was clearly decisions that she can make, changing, simple cooking, things like that, but she could never live on her own 24/7. Care 24/7. Making medical decisions, financial decisions, there's just no way she doesn't have the capacity to do that. So with that, and that's where we have full guardianship, but we allow her to make as many decisions as possible.
Yes.
So I'm just thinking, because we have full guardianship, but if anyone who had that and felt that they didn't need that, you can go back any time and change that.
You can, but I would recommend not doing that. I mean, you have to get a new clinical team report or a new medical certificate. It's a whole trip back through. You've got to give notice to everybody. The key is you are actually functioning in the way that it was meant to be. You are seeking input and trying to make decisions based on what your person wants. That is really the key. The reason that we're so stuck on this idea of limitations is because someday the guardian may not be you. And you want that unknown person to be as respectful as you are. And sometimes that means making sure that legally you've carved out all of those things. I know that we have 15 minutes left, but because you guys all hung out to the end, I wanted to give out copies of my book as a present to all of you. So I am going to start passing them out while we talk about the remaining questions that you guys all have. Well, do you have somebody that you want to give it to?
Let me pass them out.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Yeah, I brought one for everybody, so take another one. Well, if you have somebody that you might want to give one to, you're welcome. I brought one for everybody, so. Okay, so other questions? I know you have a lot. Yes.
How do you eliminate or change a co-guardian?
Oh my gosh, that is such a great question and also so frustrating to talk about. In our state, how do we change a co-guardian? So we can always have a guardian resign, but it is another whole court process. And if we are just having a resignation but not closing out the guardianship, we do not need to provide that medical certificate or that clinical team report. But if we are swapping out and we want to add in a new co-guardian or a new guardian, period, we have to do a whole new case with a new docket number and a new medical certificate or a new clinical team report, new service to everybody, and it's the same case as when we first went for the guardianship. So it's a pain. You basically are terminating the old guardianship and starting up a new guardianship. And for whatever reason, our courts do not allow us just to motion in, not petition, but motion in and just swap out people. It is complicated and it is just a whole new thing. This is one of the reasons that I have people speak to somebody before they decide to do the AFC, because it is not that easy to change your mind. And if you are only going to do AFC for a few years and then your child is going to leave your home, you may want to think very carefully about the balance between having to do a whole new guardianship to add in the other parent at 22 when your kid moves out of home or out of their residential placement. So really, the AFC question, it's just more complicated than people think. There's a lot that goes into it.
So unless that co-guardian voluntarily resigns, that's an easier way of doing it?
If the co-guardian resigns and you're just leaving one guardian, it's still a court process, but it is a little bit simpler in that we don't need to get that medical certificate or that clinical team report. But we still have to go through notice, and it's still a whole process But it's just not starting up a brand new guardianship.
It is huge when that, this was what happened to my husband and I. We were co-guardians. I resigned so I could be the AFC person, and then my son went into a group home. I'm like, no, I really don't have it. Like, you have being the only guardian now. When if something happens, you need to get me on.
Yeah.
Back on that. And yeah, it's just as
It's a thing.
It's like this huge like.
It's a thing. It's a thing.
Like I think it took years.
So you have to start all over again.
You do. It's a brand new case. Absolutely. I have a question in the back. Facebook people, thank you.
Question from Facebook. You mentioned co-guardianship. How many guardians can you list?
Oh, another good question. The law doesn't limit you in how many guardians you can have, but most of our government agencies do not prefer for you to have more than 2. And I have had DDS counsel actually say to me, we will not accept 3 guardians. We will object. I think they have calmed down a little bit about that, but the reason is that they don't want to be chasing guardians all over the place to sign their paperwork. And, 3 guardians means 3 people who have to agree. Every person who is a co-guardian has the same responsibility. It's not divvied up. It's not like, oh, if I have 3 guardians, you'll do this thing, you'll do this thing, and you'll do this thing. It's really not that simple. Everybody really has all the same responsibility. So legally, any number of guardians. Realistically and practically, we're talking 2.
Is there a way to have I don't know, like a guardian waiting? Like if 2 parents are the kid's guardian.
I love these questions.
They may say, okay, 2 parents, the kid's guardian. Okay,
Yes.
they're going off out to dinner in a car together.
Yep.
Or flying on an airplane together or something like that. So they're thinking,
Yeah.
well, the responsible thing to do, just like when your kids were little,
Right.
is to have somebody, as somebody else, if something happened to both of us at the same time.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't want that person on there, like the sibling,
Right.
to chase that person for the paperwork. Is there a way to put that in place?
Such a good question.
This person gets to be the
We do not in our state, like some other states, have standby guardians. New York does. We do not. The only way to do this and have it be a little bit helpful is to do a guardianship nomination form with your attorney, okay? And that as part of your estate plan. That person still has to go to court. It's a brand new case, again, and it's complicated by the fact that if you die suddenly, we have to do it in an emergency basis. One of my attorneys was in court all day today trying to get me appointed for somebody who has like hours left to live. And they wouldn't accept it without the clinical team report. This is crazy. We're going to have no guardian for about 10 days while we're chasing down a clinical team report for somebody who clearly has not changed in the last 20 years that they've been under guardianship. It's very frustrating. Our courts can be very form over substance. They are just following the rules and they're not looking practically at what needs to happen. But that is what happens. You can do some planning, but that person still has to run into court. There's no automatic, and it's a whole new case. Very frustrating.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
This is in regards to my niece who lives in shared living with another family. And both her parents just are really not in the picture. They just don't have the capacity to take care of her.
Okay.
She's 30. But she has a sister who's a couple of years older than her now. She's bought a new home and she has her own family and wanted to gain guardianship of her sister because she is, I guess, has a state guardian. And that makes sense?
Yep. So she's just got somebody appointed from the list of guardians that works with DDS.
So my husband and my niece went to the court to try to speak with the guardian that she has to try to figure how they can switch it over. And it's not making it very easy for her to do that. You think if a family member wants to come and take place and do
Yeah.
that, why should it be so difficult? He's just not making it easy for the family member.
There is no easy at all when it comes to, doing the guardianship. We have protections in place for a reason. Most of them stem from elder services. Most of them stem from wanting to protect the elderly because we have just way too many cases of people who run in, get guardianship, get access to the money, and help themselves to it. So our folks are kind of lumped in with a lot of those protections, unfortunately. I just have to say, under these kind of circumstances, your niece should just get an attorney because they will make the process easier, and although it'll cost money, it'll be better than pounding your head against the wall. When there's already a guardian in place, a guardian who may or may not want to step down, and there's a lot to do, it can be really challenging to go forward. And if DDS is involved, they have to be noticed. And I've had DDS say to me, well, where has this person been all their life? Why now? And they can be protective, let's put it that way, suspicious and protective. I have somebody that I'm a guardian for whose siblings were younger and are just now getting to a point where they're getting back involved with their family member. And I hope someday we'll be ready to take over for me, because I think it's best if you can have a family member or somebody that knows your child, your person involved. So I got a lot of that back from DDS. Well, we're not there yet. You're doing a fine job. Let's just wait and see if they stick around. Yeah, sometimes we're not that family-centered. What can I say? So we are just at the end of our time, and I wanted to mention that in the spirit of constantly trying to reach people, I know not everybody can afford me, not everybody wants to come and see an attorney for things. So at our firm, we try really hard to get as much information out as possible. That's why I do things like this. I have a new podcast I just wanted to tell everybody about, and I've had a lot of great people on that podcast already. I just interviewed somebody from Autism Housing Pathways, and I just interviewed Cheryl Ryan Chan, who does person-centered planning. So there's a lot of great interviews that are out now and are coming up this month as well. So it is called Parenting Impossible. Obviously, all the podcasts are free. I don't have any advertisers, so you don't have to listen to any of that as you're listening to my podcast. And I just hope that if you are able to listen in, that you will consider giving me a rating and a review so that we can keep reaching more people. It helps the algorithms. I don't understand all the math, but it does. Same thing with the book. If you read the book and you like the book, I would appreciate a review on Amazon or on any of the other book review sites that are out there. Again, it just helps reach more people. And I know when I started to write the book, my thought process was, I want to make sure that nobody feels as lonely as I did when my girls were growing up. And it's been my mission to really make sure that we connect families as much as possible. That's where the good stuff happens. So I thank you for coming out today. I will stay and answer some questions for anybody who still has them. Thank you, Facebook friends, for joining us. I really appreciate it.